So, welcome everyone to Rollbacks, Recovery, and Rebuilding, Lessons Learned from What Went Wrong. Today, we are going to have 2.5 hours of really cool, informative sessions about just overcoming and learning from the unexpected challenges that projects can throw at us. I am Pilot Irwin. I'm a WPCampus community member, board member, and the director of events. And I'm really grateful to all of our presenters for coming out today. This topic was actually suggested by members of our community. We try always to make sure that our programming is relevant to you all and what you are interested in and what you're looking for. So if you have anything that you would like to see from a future event, you should let us know, because I love when people tell me what I should be doing. It gives me a real sense of direction. It's great. While I have you all here, I also want to take this opportunity to announce our fall summit, which is Leading on Accessibility in Higher Education. That'll be taking place on Thursday, September 17th, 10 a.m. Eastern. We like this time slot. It keeps things predictable. This event will highlight the work that's being done by campus champions to demonstrate that building for accessibility is possible, approachable, and necessary. Participants will come away equipped to advocate for accessibility and teach by example so that they can cement accessibility into the work of themselves, their team, and their school. Registration is now open, and we'll put the link in chat. We are also hoping, looking, wanting our community members to present talks about their work advocating for accessibility. We want to highlight what you are doing. So if you or someone you know has a story that you would like to share, please submit. The call for proposals is open from now until August 15th, and that link is also going to be in chat. Reed, if you could pop those in there for me, that would be great. So as I said, today's topic, overcoming unexpected challenges, was requested by members of our community. We are a nonprofit, 100% volunteer organization, and we're able to provide events like this one because of the dedication of the people who donate their time, their energy, and their skills to support our mission and build our community. So if you would like to volunteer for the events committee, which I'm biased towards, but we also do other things, for the events committee or for any of our other projects, please reach out to us through Slack or on our website, or mention it in chat and we can follow up with you. I think I've already said thank you, but I'm going to say it again because it deserves to be said. Thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us today, especially our guest presenters who are volunteering their time and expertise to share with you. Today's webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our website. It'll also be posted on YouTube. After our last session of the day, we will close out the event with an WPCampus after hours social session that's happening from 12:30 to 1 p.m. Eastern for any attendees who want to stick around, participate in an open discussion and hang out, just talk about all of the things that we heard about today. And so I'm hoping to see you all there. It's now time for our first session, Change is the Job, How to Lead, Build, and Adapt, with Ben Hommerding. Let me introduce him. Ben Hommerding is the acting director and lead academic product manager for the School of Technology at Western Governors University, where he designs and launches cutting-edge IT degree programs. Outside of academia, he is an avid overlanding enthusiast and the content creator behind Ben in Beta, a tech and automotive YouTube channel. Today, he and Taylor Jadin will be talking about leading people and projects through change, managing setbacks and overcoming them, and how to react quickly when issues arise. I will turn it over to you two. Ben and Taylor, go for it.
Thanks for having me. I guess I would say that first, but yeah, Taylor and I have worked together in the past, and I was excited when he reached out for this opportunity. So I'm happy to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what you cooked up today, Ben. So
We'll see where it goes. So a couple things. Number one, for people who have never heard of Western Governors University, I believe it's still true, but we're really close with one other university, but we would be the largest university, private university and nonprofit in the country. We're close to about 200,000 students total right now. So we have a lot. My program specifically, which are the IT programs, so our bachelor's and master's programs in IT, have about 10,000 students just by themselves. And our cybersecurity program is right around 20,000 students. So our programs are bigger than a lot of colleges. So we have scale issues on a different level than a lot of other colleges. So some of the stories you might hear might have to do with some of the scaling pieces, but I'm going to try to wrap. I've also worked at St. Norbert College with Taylor, and we only had 5,000 students total. So totally different roles. So I've worked in a lot of different places there. But yeah, Taylor, I don't know if you want to drop anything in before, we would go from here. But
I think let's go for it. So,
all right, sounds good. The thing that I think is important about change is some people view change like as a project. It's got a start date and an end date, and then the change is done and you move forward. I don't think that's ever been true, honestly, for number one, but it's definitely not true anymore in today's world. Change is a permanent condition that we live in all aspects of business, but definitely in higher education and in educational technology as well. So I think that's important that we frame things that way, and that we just think about building a culture around change in a way that you can thrive through change. And I think that's something you and I have done a lot in the past, Taylor, even at St. Norbert. And that's the important piece of how you frame it and how you move forward with your team. And also, we wanted to make sure that if you have questions, please drop them in, and we'll just try to address them as quickly as possible. And we want to make this as interactive as we can. I think that makes it just more real that way, and we can talk about if you have questions like tell me more about this or how would you handle a situation. We could try to answer that, which I think is kind of fun as well. But the moment we finish building things today in higher ed, in technology and higher ed, the world's already moved on. So our job is really to build systems and people that are okay with that, because we're never going to be on the cutting edge, but we can't be also at the tail of everything either. So we have to be somewhere in the middle. And hopefully that's one of the takeaways you can have from today. Yeah.
yeah, I think one of the things you say, never on the cutting edge, right? And I think one of the challenges with almost anything, with almost anyone doing something new in higher ed, that folks realize is we have to cover a lot of ground when we work in higher ed. Like there's a ton of uh, institutions do almost everything, and so it's difficult when you have to push forward in one aspect and I'll make sure that nothing else gets left behind, no people get left behind, no processes get left behind, things like that, right? It's a unique challenge, I think, for higher ed.
And I guess let us know in the comments if this resonates with any of you. So you work at an institution that has some areas that might be on the cutting edge, and then you might have some systems that were built in 1995 or run in a spreadsheet, and that's your database. That's how you run things. And you have to overcome those things as you're trying to move forward. And even at a place that's as big as WGU, where you might think, wow, everything should be super cutting edge, it was formed in 1997. And honestly, some of the backend technology and code bases are from 1997, and they have prevented us from, it's constant frustration for us to be able to move forward and do some of the things that we need to do to serve our students at the scale that we're talking about. So I'm assuming other people have felt that as well. And what I want to talk about a little bit here is, we our programs for the IT, like so the bachelor's and masters. I came to WGU in about 2023, and I came from a company called Udacity at the time, which was building content for in the tech space again, at scale, and it's hands-on content with like human graded projects and things like that. So I had a lot of experience from that, bringing that over to WGU. The programs that I came into hadn't been meaningfully redeveloped since about 2018 or 2019. So we're talking about even in 2023, they were already pretty old for IT programs and didn't include a lot of content in and around things like cloud, AI, governance and compliance risk or agile. And so we had to basically rebuild those programs from the ground up. And we could have tried to patch them together and make it work that way, but we knew they really needed a, stem to stern kind of update. And what might be different for us and might be similar to what you all might have to deal with in your roles within your universities is that WGU builds content and thinks about content in a very different way. So we have what's called a disaggregated model. And that means there's the people on my end who are like the product side of thinking like what's the student journey, what courses do we need, what skills need what do the skills need to be so they can get a job and be successful, what's the student experience going to be like in those courses. It's all online. We have to make sure that students can actually do what they say they can do because we're competency based. And then in a traditional university, you might have instructors building kind of their own courses based upon a syllabus that everybody sort of shares, that kind of thing, but they're basically allowed to kind of do whatever they want. Well, we don't have that luxury here. So when we build content, it's with about, I want to say like 10 different teams are involved in building the content of a course in a program. So it's a chaotic thing that happens over 18 months in this case. In fact, it was almost 2 years from the time that we started thinking about the programs and we were actually able to launch them at WGU because of all these processes. And what we couldn't do was our programs were doing really well. So we couldn't create a program that was bad and suddenly everybody didn't want to attend anymore, right? That's a risk. So it has to launch at some minimum amount of quality, no matter what. Because the other thing that has happened in the past is there's been a new program, things were rushed a little bit. The program wasn't quite ready or fully baked. And then students, where they go to Reddit. They post all over online about, hey, this program or these courses are bad. And then that's not good for the reputation of our school. And we didn't want that to happen. So that was kind of the key driver around the end of this was it had to come out at quality no matter what we did. But the big change piece here was not only were we changing all of these different things because of my experience, we were coming out to build one of the very first programs that was going to have a lot of AI in it. Students being able to use AI throughout the course content on assessments and having a lot of AI-based activities so students could get more real-world practice from, again, an online university. Another thing that's really big and different about WGU from other universities is we start monthly. So every single month of the year, there are new cohorts of students starting. It's not like they start in January, they end in June, and that's everybody has to complete stuff within that term. Every month we have a new 6-month term starting. That also means we can't do a lot of collaboration with students because they're not all in the courses at the same time, and they can also accelerate. So in a term, they could start with their 12 to 15 credits. If they get those done early, they can then accelerate courses from their next term into that one so they can graduate more quickly. These are all the different constraints that we have to work with in being able to build content that makes sense, that's going to work for accelerators, students who are not accelerators, those who are slow, people who are already working in industry need to have a good experience versus people who have no experience at all. So just kind of setting the background for some of that. What happened when we got into all of this was because of all the different pieces, the courses were coming out at a very poor quality because we would have designers who would design the content based upon some inputs we would give them, but they were not experts in IT. And the courses then would come back to us, and the first thing that would happen was we'd have to review something like a 120-page document of what a course would look like in a Word file. If anybody's ever had to review an entire course in a Word document or a Google Doc, it's the worst thing you can ever imagine trying to determine whether or not this is going to be good. And we actually said no to that. We're not going to review courses in Word documents. We need to see them in the platform so we can understand what that student experience is going to look like. And that's where we're going to do this. So we're not doing that review. So we started doing a bunch of changes along the way in this process that had never been done before and could have really thrown a wrench into how the team viewed us as partners and stakeholders and could have really torn it all completely down. But in the end, it actually worked out really well. One of the other things that was happening was we were in, so every course had its own document, 120 pages to start, but there were other documents involved for the assessment, and there were Excel files, and there were like, it was just a nightmare of things trying to figure out what's going on. So what I did as the product manager at the time, and I was not director when we started this, I had a director then. I built a whole basically application. We can look at it that way, I guess, in a product called Coda.io. Taylor's probably familiar with that. We've used it in the past. And I took all that disparate information and I got it into one place so that when no matter what was going on, everybody went to one place. That was a massive change for that group. And they could, and some of them said, well, we've never done it this way. That's the classic, right? Like, we've never done it this way. Well, that's true, but let's try it this way. And basically, if you work with the groups to say, I'm gonna continually ask you for feedback, and that's one of the tips from today is you need to have a continual feedback loop to make the process better, to take people's opinions in and actually address them, and not just say, well, this is the way I think it should be, so that's how it needs to be going forward. And if you create that collaborative group, people are more open to the change. And it does take time for even the beginner people who are a little bit more interested in it to really feel like, is this going to work or not? And over time, we continually built that product out into a place again where everything was. We did all of our course reviews inside of there and tracked everything. And that became important later on when some of the courses came back with a lower quality because we had documented everything that we said as the vision for like the upfront part. All of our subject matter experts said, these are the issues with the content. And then when the teams were like, well, we don't have time to make changes or whatever, we're like, hey, these are the changes that have to be made in order for us to launch this at a minimum quality. And if we hadn't captured that information and kept it in one place where we could refer back to, then our courses and programs would have launched at a much lower quality and it would have been bad. There was a lot of change management, bringing each team on, showing them this new document process and how this was going to work and how they were going to work within that, and then also taking their feedback in to make it easier for them. But in the end, it made it a lot easier to see the whole entire process. And those programs launched in April, and we had over 100% growth in our master's programs year over year for the first quarter that it launched, and like about a 15% growth in our undergraduate programs in that same time frame. So that's a pretty big deal for us. We, in a time when enrollment's kind of been sliding, I think, in higher ed overall, we're actually growing those programs. And a lot of that is due to the fact that we brought people along and created a process in which they could all participate and give feedback on, even though it was completely different than what they had done before. And now this CODA ecosystem has been adopted with that whole entire group. They are now building out all of the how do we build content in Coda itself, and we're linking all this stuff together. We're going to be doing some really crazy things with creating content at scale quickly with AI, and really reducing what I had a 2-year timeline, and I'm on a project right now to optimize that process to bring it down to 6 months from idea to first student start. That's where we are today, and that's all because being bold enough to say, I think there's a better way, but I want to bring you along with me. I'm not going to shove you into it, but I'm going to bring you along on this journey. And I think that's a big piece of like how we lead is really important about how a change is perceived.
Yeah. So one of the I got a couple questions. I'll kind of interrupt you for a second, but and one thing I'll point out too, for folks who aren't familiar, Coda is it's kind of like Notion. It's not exactly the same as Notion, but it's one of those like kind of modern, workspace type tools where you can do a lot of different things in there. There's some automation. There's some multimodal, multimedia. It pulls in a lot of tools, but I say that to say that it is significantly different from I have this Word document. It's not like I would not describe it as we're taking this Word document and we're going to put it in Google Docs because Google Docs does comments better. It is a bigger change than something like that. So with that in mind, how do you suggest, like, it sounds to me like this is a story where you saw something that you're like, if I try to push this out into the future, if we keep doing this now, this is going to be a disaster if we don't do something, essentially. Correct. Or we're going to have to, all you know, or this is going to be a miserable process to try and get it to not be a disaster. Essentially, we're all going to
Correct.
be, it's going to be late, or we're going to be working, overtime and all kinds of things. What's it's easier, I think, after the fact, right? To say like, well, it was obvious we had to change something, but like, do you have like any advice on how to spot those kind of breaking points when you're saying like, no, we can't look at this as a sunk cost. We have to try something new, essentially.
Yeah, so for us, I was trying to look at it. My team is just the IT team, right? There are other groups that had of people who have my same job, but also other groups that have are putting out content, and it's kind of a constant piece of this. And so I'm for the first year and a half that I was at WGU, I was hearing what was happening to those other groups of like how awful the process was of creating things. So there was some of that
Wow.
already, like, hey, I'm in for a nightmare, but I'm preparing for it, right?
Yeah.
And but the ultimate piece of this was anybody who works at a university cares about the student. Like that's like one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, is the student having a great experience. And if not, what can we do to make it better? So for me, I would always bring it back to that. If we continue on this process, what's the likelihood that we have put together a product that's going to have led to a great student experience? And after we kind of tried it their way the first time, it was like there's like a 0% chance, maybe it's like
Hmm.
a 5% chance that we're going to launch this a course that's going to look good, but we have to do 22 more of those.
Hmm.
And also, you're looking for feet. So the other piece of this was where is the human in the loop of what's going on or what humans are involved? So they would want feedback from us on like a batch. So they give us, remember I said those documents are 120 pages, and they would send an email to four of those courses, we'll say. So multiply 120, we're like 600 pages or something like that, right? Like by some of them are longer, some of them are shorter. And they're like, and and they do that like on a Tuesday and say, and we'd like you to review this by the end of the week. And you're just like, that's not really humanly possible for me to give you good quality feedback on this. And so when we started seeing some of that of like, if I can't give you the right feedback, whatever you do after this is not likely to be good because I
Yeah.
haven't given you my feedback. And so I started seeing those things and talking with the team and saying, could we do this a different way? If we did it this way, what might it look like? And then I started building it out. So I'd always, as a product manager, I was trying to take that feedback as well. Like, I think there's a better way, but what are you doing now? What do you have to do later? What are the outcomes or the outputs of some of this stuff? Because we still have to work within the flow of the machine that we're working in. We can't break it down completely.
Yeah.
We were in the middle of it. If I had been asked to optimize at the beginning, it would be different because you could say there's a different process for this prototype that we're going to run through. We're going to get some feedback on it and put it out that way. That's the best way to do it. But we were building the plane as we were flying it, and that's the worst way to do it. But it's also how it happens a lot, I think, yeah, pretty much anywhere. So
It's both the worst way and I think realistically how 99% of things
yeah,
get done. Is kind of my philosophy is people if you obviously the analogy doesn't work then, right? Like building, you don't actually want to build a plane while you fly it, but
right.
sometimes the simplest way to make a change that you can actually prove out and iterate on quickly is to do something where the feedback loop is tight because you're currently testing it. So
100% agree. Again, if you have questions or thoughts in the chat, drop them in. I like responding to people. I think it's just part of who I am. But I'm happy to continue on the journey here. I do have a document I can drop in. I just gonna need to remember where I put that tab now here. I think it's right here. Let's see if I can actually put this document in the chat for people and see how it goes. I should have renamed it better than this. Let me rename it first. I'll rename it at the end and I'll drop it in. Let's do that. That's probably a better way to go. Now that I'm thinking about it. All right, so that was one of the instances of how things happened at WGU, and that's at a scale. We're building things as it went along, but it did turn out really well. And do we still have a few courses that need some zhuzhing around along the way or a little bit of improvement? Yes, but of everything that we launched, it's a very small amount of where we're at. The the other thing that I wanted to bring up was how you can bring change about in slightly different ways when you're just like you're banging your head up against the wall and things aren't working. And again, let me know and let us know if this resonates with any of you. When I started at St. Norbert, um, Taylor was working in IT in the IT space specifically at that point. He later came over and actually had the same job that I did, and we worked together a little more closely. But when I started, my job was basically a tech coordinator, right? Like help integrate technology into uh, into teaching and learning. And what I found was none of the faculty, or a very tiny percentage of the faculty, was open to anything new and different in what they were doing already. And so if I held a workshop, there would be like the two same instructors or the two same professors would come, and that would be it. And I think I did that for like 6 or 8 months or almost a year. And I was talking with our boss at the time, and it's like, I'm not sure what my purpose is here. Like I don't know how to affect any positive change because nobody seems to want to change. And I think that's very common at a university, especially a tenure track one where people are like, I don't have to worry about what I'm doing so much anymore. It's been working. We're good to go. So what happened was, since I wasn't talking to the faculty, I started walking around the campus and I would walk into different staff departments and I would just start meeting people and talking with them. And I started discovering that they had problems that needed to be solved, and they were hungry for solutions to make their lives easier. And we were a Google institution. I don't know if St. Norbert still is or not, but we were a Google institution at that time. And so I started showing them how to automate some things in Google Sheets or how they can create a better workflow using different tools that we had available to us. And once I started doing that, they would say, well, can you come back again next week and show me this? Or, hey, I think so and so over here might need some help with this. And once I did that a few times, I started saying, well, what if we put together a training for the staff and invited the faculty and they can come if they want, but let's put it together for the staff and see what that looks like. And we did that the first time, and I think we had something like 60% of the staff attended, like, and staff and faculty together at St. Norbert at the time was like, I think 700 people, something like that.
Sounds about right.
Oh,
Yeah.
yep. And we were all like, whoa, this is huge. And there were so many people attending that I had to build an application to be able to take registrations. Uh, and I had different people teaching different stuff. So like Taylor, I was like, hey, Taylor, because you have an education background, will you be willing to teach about this? And I think we had just about everybody in the IT side teaching something, doing something to show people how to become more efficient and effective at their job using these tools so they had more time to do other stuff. And it went over really, really well. And from there, I started talking with our CIO about like, well, what's next? Where do we go from here? And his suggestion was, well, how could we, really make this even a bigger deal? How can we reach the students? How can we get even more faculty in? And so we created this thing called the Tech Bar. And what that did was it allowed we use student staff and our own staff. And about that time, Taylor was coming over to work in our area. And we tried a couple different iterations of this because we were really trying to help students use technology more effectively. So initially, the student staff was sort of at night in a different building. I wasn't really around that time at that time. I worked my day and went home, and it wasn't really taking off. What we ended up doing was bringing that into the ITS space or the IT space, and we created a whole little area for that group to be able to work during the day when we were there. And then they had some after hours time as well because they learned how to interact with people. And anybody, faculty, student, staff, even alumni could come in and learn anything tech related. Like, how do I set up a Twitter account at the time? X now, I guess. How do I do a domain of one's own on WordPress? I want to bring video into my instruction. How do I do this? And we would work together, and sometimes that would take a staff member to really action on that, but a lot of times the students would be able to help them with this. And was built into the strategic plan after I left. As I was leaving, that was literally built into the strategic plan, and it still exists today because I still see their posts. And that was something that then started pulling in the faculty of like, well, I want to do that too. My staff person is doing this thing over here. I want to learn how to do that. So the whole change management thing was I was trying to push people in the beginning. That didn't work. Instead, we pulled them along with us. And that is probably the biggest lesson I've learned about change is you need to get people to want to come with you instead of pushing them through the change. And sometimes you have to push through changes, right? It could be like, hey, we have to add
Sure.
pass keys because that's what's going on. Like everybody has
It's
to have this. We
it's
need to make it
happening.
more.
It's
Yeah,
security. Deal
exactly.
with it.
So there's no
Yeah.
choice. But then there's these other pieces of like, how do we pull the group with us? And by doing that, you're involving them in the feedback loop again of like, how do we make this better? How can we make the training better than we did last time? How do we improve what we did, how we served you at the tech bar? And again, then people go out word of mouth and say, "Hey, did you know they're doing this thing over here?" And you're able to really act on that and make it bigger. So like those are, yeah, the tech power origin story, basically.
Yeah, Pilot
Yeah,
has heard about the tech bar from me in various times. So,
yeah,
um, but I think it's a really good example of sort of how to like different aspects of managing change, where thinking through like when you want to pull people along, it's often about like marketing, right? Like into some extent. And by that, I don't just mean like advertising and communication. I mean like literally looking at the people, your audience, whatever you want to call them, the humans that you are serving essentially, and address and figuring out, well, who is like game? Who can I go to first, right? Like you looked at this and we're like, this is not working, trying to get faculty to show up to these workshops. Like there's a couple people who are interested, and that's great, but I'm not able to, rope in people. Like I always kind of say, like, like with the analogy, like preaching to the choir, like we're not able to add members to the choir like this way. It's great talking to the people who are already in the choir, but we're not adding to it. Um, and so you identified, well, there's a need that people have, that a different set of people have, and maybe we can start there and kind of gain momentum. And it really worked out well. I will say that the tech bar, is kind of like for folks who are familiar with this concept, is sort of like a peer tutoring center to some extent, where that students are helping other students. In this case, kind of like TAs for technology projects, but it lives in an IT department. It's not part of an academic program, um, and it's general. There's certain specialties, and it started there, but we found success being really open with who and what we would help with. And they still, I'll say that model is still how the tech bar operates as far as I can see from the outside. I don't work at St. Norbert anymore, but like you said, their social posts, that was a conscious decision. Is like, well, why is a service in an IT department on Instagram? Like what's the point? And it's not like that was a completely new idea. You see colleges do this for various services, but the whole point of this was to say we need folks to know that this is a thing they can come to and get help with. And once that started, got out on that, we started having faculty ask to sort of partner with the tech bar for a
yeah.
particular thing they wanted to do. And we were able to find those folks that otherwise like coming to this workshop wasn't resonating with them. And they still do that. There still is a component. So it's kind of interesting how like by focusing on a different audience, you did get to that first audience eventually.
And the part that I thought was interesting about some of this was, we did this thing at this little tiny university in Wisconsin. And that was actually a session at Google Cloud Next one year. Taylor and I were there, and Google invited us to talk about how we had created this at the university. So it had some legs. It was pretty cool, and I'm so happy to see that it's still going today. It probably looks different as it should, but it's still going today, which is pretty cool. Really quickly, I just want to share this. I will share the link. It looks like. Oh, hopefully I don't have to restart. Okay, I think we're good. Hopefully I won't have to. I'll have to send it because I can't send it in the chat. I'll have to send it to the group and then it can like give you the
I can
file after the
I
fact.
can
But
forward a link for you, Ben, if you need.
okay, it's on my computer, so I'll have to. It's just a PDF. But this is something I wanted to share. And in all honesty, I used AI to help create it because if I created something like this, it would take me forever. Which is another tip is with change, you can iterate really quickly with AI, and I'm sure you all know that already, as far as all that goes. But this was just based upon the things that I was going to talk about today. And we've talked about a few of these already, but I will leave this with you so that you can take a look at it, refer back to it if you need to. It's nothing earth-shattering or life-changing, I don't think, but sometimes it's just good to be reminded of some of the things that are on this. But the big thing really is, especially in today's world, change is not the enemy, stagnation is. We talk a lot at WGU in our specifically in the School of Technology of we don't want to become blockbuster. We talk about that still all the time. We don't want that. We can't stagnate. So we want to be as close to the front as we possibly can at WGU, but we know we can't be on the bleeding edge, mainly because that stuff hasn't been invented yet in some cases. We're trying in a couple different areas, but also we have to have programs that serve where students are going to be in the next few years, not in 5 years or in 10 years necessarily, because we don't even know what those skills are going to be yet. Uh, but these are hopefully some tips that may resonate with folks as well. Um, there are the feedback loops is the big one. We've talked about that. But the other piece is really investing in the people that you're working with. If the change you're creating is just to make your life easier and not other people's, then it's really going to be hard to move it forward. And I've felt those changes at every institution that I've been at of we're making this change. Is this just to make somebody's life easier in finance, or is this actually going to lead to change that's going to be useful for everybody? And did you actually talk to us about it? And I can give you an example of a less great change that I wasn't really a part of, but people probably feel this as well. Massive, again, this is a WGU change, so it's a massive institution. And one of the things we have are a lot of projects that are going on all the time. And not long after I started, we had been tracking a lot of our projects in smart sheets. That really wasn't productized enough for something the size. We have about, I think, right around 10,000 employees. So probably not the best place to track something like that. And they decided to start looking at project management tools. And we had, being a large institution with no one area, we had some people using Atlassian and Jira. Some people were using ServiceNow. Some people were using, again, smart sheets, and like it was all kind of all over the place. But what happened was somebody somewhere just said, well, I like ServiceNow, so we're just going to use ServiceNow, rather than going out and getting a ton of feedback from across the institution of what features do we need in a project management tool? How might we best align across for one tool rather than having several tools? Is there an advantage to having several project management tools? Do we need that because our groups are actually meaningfully different? That never happened. So we just settled on ServiceNow. They moved to that tool. And those of you who know ServiceNow and use it, it's a great tool for managing a lot of the IT infrastructure and for ticketing and things like that. But they purchased a project management piece and they bolted it onto their system. And the first time we went to a training on it, everybody's like, there's no chance this even works with our workflow because it's not flexible enough to do that. And so it's been a fight ever since then. And now my understanding is we're going to be getting rid of that tool and switching to, I think, Jira or something else because it's not working. But taking that time up front to really understand the problem and what the outcomes are, what you're trying to do, what problem are you trying to solve is really, that's the most important piece of any kind of change. And if you've done that work and gotten enough feedback from the group, you're probably going to do a pretty good job of that. And people are going to be more willing to change with you along the way. So again, sometimes you just have to say this is the change because there's again, security is one of those areas. Like this is what we have to do. But if you can do some of that work up front, that can be really, really helpful too. So investing in the people that are going to be part of that change is a big deal and creating those feedback loops there. Embracing experiments and failing fast is another big piece of this, which I think is really important too. And I can tell you a couple other stories about that. But I don't know if Taylor, if you had any questions in around that piece there, or if any others have really felt this at their institution as well.
I was kind of sometimes um, I think a lot about, moves between tools, right? And what tool to use for this and that. That's because I like tools. That's fun for me. And it's part of my job is to help people figure out things to use. And it has been in some way for a long time, part of various jobs. So I'm kind of oriented towards that. But I think one of the things like translating that story, um, it to 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 put it in like a box for a second, like a category, I mean, there's a lot of things that there's often people, I think when they're thinking about a change, they think the change is happening in a different place than it is. They think, well, the change is that we're moving to this new system. And that's part of the change. But the real change here is we're saying right now, we probably use across this group of 10,000 people, 15 different project management tools. And the change is we're all going to use one. And the secondary on effect of that is that some of those people are going to be changing to this specific one. But the bigger change in that equation is that we're all going to use one thing. So it better meet all the requirements. It better be usable. It better be either we can train folks how to use it or intuitive enough that, we don't have to worry as much about training and documentation. Like that's the bigger change is that we're moving from 15 things to one or whatever number, right? But um, and there is, of course, advantages to that, right? Because now we're all using one thing. Obviously, maybe it's cheaper. Uh, Perhaps we can collaborate easier because we're all using a simple thing. But what are the downsides? It may not do what we need it to do. Um, I think that's a common I think that's a common misstep in this type of thing is mistaking what the real change is when you're leading through something like this. Um, and I yeah, I'm sorry. It's more of an observation than a
Yeah.
question. I wish it was a question, but
No, I
I
can
don't know
build
how
on
to
that.
avoid that. It's a hard mistake to make when it's you're the person doing it. It's easier after the fact for me to say that than it is if I was the person trying to move everyone to service now,
So going back to what you're saying and building on that, right? The change isn't just it started here, it ended here, we're on a new system. The change is really we are more efficient and effective on this new system than we were before. And that requires not just the movement of it, but the training of everybody after that, the fact that everybody's bought into the system, that they're using it, that they understand how it works and how it can work better for them. And they're constantly learning within that platform. You're not getting stuck in like, well, this is how I add a project every single time. Well, maybe there's a different way to add a project in a better way for a different type of project, or maybe we need to modify the system. And again, having that feedback loop of, okay, we're in there. This part's not working for me. Is there a way to solve that? So it should be, it's a cyclical thing that continues. That change management continues after the launch of the product. It should at least. If it doesn't, then it's probably not going to be super effective. And I think that's the piece of that of like it's the cyclical thing that continues forward, but the outcome should be we're more efficient and effective after we're done. So that was the question of that's in the chat of do you have tips on how to identify the institution specific hurdles? And so I think if you look at something in your institution that has waste to it, a lot of waste. So if there's something that like this takes X amount of time and it feels like it could be faster, there's probably something you can do within there to change the process or the products that are used or whatnot to make that a better process. If there's something where people are being misinformed or they're unaware of what's going on, that's another great area where you might be able to affect change if like people don't never seem to know when this is happening or they're confused when we do these updates. They don't know about new features that come out in WordPress. How do we figure that piece out so that we've done all this work because Professor X asked for this X-Men plugin that does, these amazing things. And nobody else is using it, but we put a lot of time and effort into making that, yet we think it can benefit everybody else. So now how do we bring more people? Like if Professor X asks for it, then how do we go out and see if there's other folks that might be also able to take advantage of that, give us some feedback along the way to build the tool that's going to work for more than just Professor X going forward. So just thinking about some of that stuff, I think too, is important. Like what's the scope of how this can be implemented? And we're always being asked for changes. Who will it all affect? And are there other people we could bring in? Like, oh, I know that this person was asking for something similar a couple months ago. We said no at the time, but now we're saying yes. Let's bring them in and get their opinions on it as well. And now you're building trust too, because that's another big piece of this. If you're always saying no and you're never doing what people ask, then they stop asking after a while. But if you kind of keep a list of we can't do this now, and we know, because that's the other thing. Like as a product, when I became a product manager, I went from this person who had all the ideas to solve all the problems and like, well, that doesn't work. We should do this. To yeah, we can't do that because that requires us to do a full change to the database over here before we can implement that. So I would always say, I'm not saying no, I'm just saying not now. And we need to complete this other work first. And if you do it in that respect, you can then keep a log of the people you need to come back and contact every once in a while and just say, hey, we haven't done the work yet. Here's why, but maybe it is on the horizon. It's going to be coming up in the next 3 sprints. We're going to get this work done. Now I'm going to come back to you and ask what it is you want. Has anything changed since that time? So we don't just implement whatever you asked for 3 months ago. We implement what you actually need with whatever is relevant and current now. And that builds trust with people to want to come, like, be part of that. Because lots of people have lots of great ideas, but you can't implement all of them. Yeah.
To be fair, if Patrick Stewart wants a particular plugin, I think we'll keep it around. If Professor X wants, like that's
true.
worth it to me. But yeah,
100%. Let's see. Yeah, go ahead.
So I was going to say I relate a lot to the you said sort of like the product manager mindset of that is a great request, but not right now because of because you're evaluating the time or cost or whatever, right? That would be required in weighing that, and I think that's that is a one angle on a very common problem, which is simply prioritizing things, and the equations, the resources you're dealing with can be different, but like this is as simple as we have a bunch of right now. Something I'm doing in my day job is I'm spending a lot of time thinking through the future of our documentation and how can we improve it and things like that. And it's a similar thing. I would love to add to it, but adding to it needs to be strategic. Otherwise, we will have this unmanageable thing. We need to make changes to make sure that we can, in my opinion, review it more often so that things don't stagnate. And adding to it and reviewing it more often is in direct conflict. So we're coming up with creative solutions to that. But there is, it can be hard to also be faced with, well, but why don't we have a piece of documentation on this? And my answer is not, well, because we can't afford one more article. Well, yeah, we can, but but perhaps this needs a different approach. Perhaps we need a different approach to reviewing things. And the thing I think that can be difficult is to get folks on board with the no, not right now kind of answer, and know that you have good reasons for that aren't just that we don't want to do this right now. So
Right.
especially when we're talking about like external, right? Not your own team, but customers, or maybe another team in your organization you don't work as closely with, things like that. Do you have any advice on kind of that? I always kind of think of it as like that requires trust, right? And how to kickstart that. or is it just you just got to build it piece by piece? Do you have any advice on helping build that? Here's why we need to make this decision now.
Well, I think what you're saying is the key to that, to building the trust of you have to say why and not just always be no. And
Sure.
when people hear no constantly, that's when shadow IT starts happening, right? And sorry, that's my dog in the background. But that's when you get shadow IT and people say, well, if you are always going to say no, I'm just going to go do this on my own over here. And that might be a really great solution, but it also might not be. And so if you realize every time you say no to somebody, they might, if they hear it once, it's not a big deal. But if they've heard it 6 times, they may not even be asking you anymore, and they're just going off and doing their own thing. And then you realize it later on, like, and you're like, hey, we're leaking student information through this thing that you built, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a big deal. And you can say, well, that's their fault because they went out and built the thing, but they're just trying to solve a problem that they have. So there's always that piece of like remembering, having empathy for that, even as busy as we get, of like, you have a problem. And then that piece of it, like you're asking for this. Why are you asking for it? What problem are you trying to solve and setting that up front? So now you're building that relationship of I'm interested in your problem. I can't solve it today, but if you tell me what your problem is, what the outcome, the positive outcome, what we're trying to do is look what that looks like and where it needs to be, then I can keep that in the back of my mind. And maybe I already know that there's something on the roadmap that's coming in a little bit. When I am ready to talk about that, I'm gonna come back to that person and say,
Sure.
hey, we took your feedback. Here's what we're doing.
Or
Would
sometimes
you
I
like to
can't
give?
solve it today,
Right,
not as much as I can't solve it in the way you've described, but perhaps there's
right,
a different way we can
correct.
solve it. Yeah.
Yep, yep. Oh, we can solve the problem. Here's how we're going to do it. And here's why we have to do it this way rather than the way you want. And that why
Hmm.
piece is really important for people who are like, why can't you do it just this one way? Uh, let's see. There's a couple things in the chat, so I just wanted to go through some of that. One was sometimes you get leadership saying, we're going to make this change. This doesn't work every time. But one thing you can try to do is get yourself attached to that. If you think that change it's impactful and you really want to be part of that, you can go and ask and say, "Hey, can I be an advisor to this? Can I help you give the perspective of X to this so that we don't get missed?" And a lot of times people will say, "Yeah, you're right. Oh, we didn't think about that. Sure, come on over here. Here's why I think I would be important and helpful in this working group." That does take some you have to have built enough trust for people to say let's come and do that. I think that's important too. And I'll give you one example of again what's happening right now at WGU. So with my interim position that I'm in, I have a little more influence than I do in the position I'm normally in right below that. And as my director at the time was transitioning out of her position, and we were starting to think about how do we take this process today of creating a new program that takes 18 to 24 months and bring it down to 6, I was saying, hey, I've just been through this process. I've got lots of ideas. We did some things that, well, they didn't necessarily shorten the timeline. The quality came out. And I think that's, the big part of all this, that the quality has to be whatever changes you make, you still have to make sure that it's received well, right? That's important. And sometimes speed is a pendulum. The faster you go, the less quality you might get, and the more time you spend on quality, the slower things get. And you really do have to be in the middle somewhere of like this is the minimum amount. Let me just let my dog out here. There we go. Otherwise, she'll bother me. Sorry about that. So the pendulum piece is important. But being able to attach yourself to a project because you've just been through it or you have a certain expertise or a perspective that they're not considering, that can help with some of that. Doesn't work for everything. Sometimes they don't really want you to be attached to it. They're just really just want to roll out something. And then the other part was, somebody announcing things early. One of the things that I've done as a product manager, I've realized is that, and I think you mentioned it earlier too, Taylor, with the tech bar is actually, this doesn't work for internal stuff, but the tech bar is actually putting out information where people can consume it where they are, right? The students are on Instagram, TikTok, and whatnot. So if you're putting stuff there, they're going to see it. you actually have to think about what the launch looks like of something and how often and the cadence in which you're going to let people know and keep them up to date. But that forms a team. So hopefully you've brought the right people and said, hey, we're gonna, let's come together on communication. So we're all sending one communication at one time and it's clear as to what's happening. If everybody's sending 50 communications about what they think is happening, then we're going to have a lot of chaos. But that takes management too, of managing that team and the communication pieces and who they're going out to when, because it might be we're sending out to the managers. We don't actually want that to be sent to the individual contributors yet. We just want the managers to be aware that's coming and we want to get feedback before it goes in that next group. That takes trust to make sure that they're not going to then just spill it to the individual contributors potentially if there's a reason that they don't want that to happen. So that builds trust with the right people for you to be able to be part of that conversation, which you might not be normally. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff too, that little tiny tips, I guess, there.
There can be a lot of value, and I think folks here at WPCampus will understand, hopefully understand my analogy if I make this coherently, my metaphor, I guess. But like I think there can be a lot of value in when you're talking about communicating a change, an internal one, even thinking through a lot of the same strategies you'd use to say launch a public website, right? Or launch something,
Yeah.
something digital that is public and saying, well, what types of things do we need for that? We need to have consistent, clear, concise communication. We put that front and center, maybe an elevator pitch type statement or whatever, or mission statement, whatever you want to call it, but like a summarized, concise thing. And using those same strategies and sometimes overbuilding it or feeling like you're overbuilding it can be really helpful for internal stuff that is mostly about word of mouth too. Just to have like we do this actually a lot at Reclaim, where when we have something that, even if it's something that we want to announce that doesn't really need a public thing, we will do that anyway, even if it's just a small thing, just so that it's easier for our team to reference and be consistent on. And that stuff is really valuable, and having that in an easy place. And I think if you do that, strategizing ahead of time, it pays dividends. Is also really a big benefit that I think people discount, which is not just to be on the same page, but having an element of excitement. Starting with that can have such a big difference to affect the tone of the communication going forward. And it's, this is also about affecting that tone across your team, right? And how you all communicate externally. So if you're trying to, if it's a change that, is a good change that you're excited about and you want people to feel excited about it, how you go into that room when you talk about something matters. And therefore how everyone on your team or your department does that same thing also matters.
Yeah, that's 100%. If you really think about if you're talking about the outcomes, this is where we're headed. This in the end, this is what it's going to look like. We may not be there in the first iteration of it too. Like we have steps along the way that are going to help us get there, but this is where we're headed and getting people excited about why that's important, why it's important for them, and considering all the different audiences of that is also really important. Again, if everybody feels that they're included, they're like, oh, you thought about me. That's great. Versus, what about me? Well, you didn't think about how this affects my job, right? Or how I work.
Yeah.
I
All
think,
right. Well,
yeah,
That
Ben,
seems
we're
like
at the top of the hour, so we're getting close on time. Is there anything you want to wrap up with?
I would just jump on the AI piece at the end of, the AI allows you to iterate really quickly. And for some of the things like you were just talking about with the documentation, that kind of thing, you can have a massive repository of information, but what comes back to people can be, summarized and questioned, like building agents that can help you answer those questions, even for you in your job. And but those AI agents or anything you're using AI in has to have the same change management pieces we're talking about. What is the outcome? How is it going to help the business or the user group that you're looking for and the business of the university, right? And if it's not doing those things, then why are you building it? So you don't just build to build. Make sure you're building with thought. And that's if you're doing that, change management becomes easy, whether it's AI or not.
Awesome. That's a great note to end on. Thank you, Ben. This has been really fun, and I've picked up like 25 different things that I need to start implementing just in my day-to-day life, and in my work, I suppose. We're going to take just a quick few-minute break so that people can stretch their legs, refill their coffee. Be back at 5 past for our next session, why accessibility approaches often fail and what to do instead, with Marc Haunschild. All right. See you guys soon. And we are back. Goes by pretty quick. So I really enjoyed that session, and I'm really looking forward to our next one. Let me introduce Marc real quick, and then I will let you take it away. Marc Haunschild is an accessibility consultant, trainer, author, developer, and give me a second. I made slides for a reason. I always forget.
That's enough. I'm doing quite a lot of things. Thank you.
No, that's okay. Marc Haunschild is an accessibility consultant, trainer, author, developer, and certified EAA and WAD evaluator with 20 years of experience in accessible web development. He's published several books on HTML, CSS, and accessibility, and regularly speaks at European events in German and English. His work combines deep technical expertise with a practical focus on inclusive, standards-based digital experiences. Thank you for bearing with me. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Very kind from you. Yeah, my talk is called Why Accessibility Approaches Often Fail and What to Do Instead. This comes from my background of developing and my experience when I have to persuade people what to do or why to make things accessible. And I should maybe share my slides also. I also have prepared some. Can I do this?
You should have slide sharing capabilities. Let me
Yeah,
double check.
I've got it. Sorry, I'm so often changing between Teams and Zoom and other software, so I'm sometimes around until I find the button. Okay, one thing first, I'm not speaking on behalf of my employer today, but as a freelancer, so yeah, this is important. I want to start with rubbish. A pretty interesting way to start a presentation, I hope. And the sentence I've put on the first slide is he never took out the rubbish without being asked. So this is a pretty ridiculous reason to get divorced, isn't it? I took this example from the book of a friend of mine, Fridtjof Nelting. In English translation, it's the strategy of non-intentionality. There's a lot about psychological things between leading people and relationships and so on. So how is this rubbish problem connected to accessibility? Let us dive a little bit deeper into this example. On the other perspective, the person who's taking out the rubbish is saying, I always do this, of course, only after I was asked to do so, but I'm the one who's doing the work. So why this is a problem? It's because of the invisible burden of reminding, the mental load. And if you translate it into inclusion, inclusion must not depend on being prompted. And if you think about this a little bit longer, is this just the rubbish, or is it also dishes, laundry, cleaning, caretaking, children? There's a lot of things people have to think about, and this is only be done by one person or in a partnership or in a organization. This is quite a lot of responsibility and work and load. Also, Fritjof is saying that the problem is not primarily an unequal distribution of mental load. Of course, we should go for an equal distribution, for a fair distribution, but the biggest problem is the lack of recognition and appreciation for the mental load. Normally, there's no equality. Some people must carry far more in their head than others, always and every single day. So it's just the rubbish doesn't sound so ridiculous anymore, does it? What is the change that happened here? It's something really important because we see and appreciate the burden created by mental load. Because it's really a lot of things to manage. But the mental load on people with disabilities is tremendous, yet unseen. There is no appreciation for this because people just don't know about the mental load for people with disabilities. And this mental load is caused by masking, overcompensation, passing, downplaying. We will hear about this in a minute, but first, let's take a step back. I think some people may have already some experience in accessibility. When I'm on an accessibility event, I'm always asking to raise the hand, but it's working without this. Let's just go to the next slide. Just imagine being in a situation and you want to, you have a valid point to improve accessibility. You know what to do, what to change. We heard about this a lot in the last chat. And now imagine, do you have the courage to speak up and make your point, or are you afraid that everyone will roll their eyes? And for the people in the accessibility sector, this is also quite familiar. They all have made this experience. When I make the people to show their hands, they are all, or most of them, raising their hands. And many don't have the courage to speak up every time. When you don't step up for people with disabilities, then legitimate concerns are marginalized. Suggestions for improvement are brushed off as unnecessary, or we will do this later, or we have higher priority for other things right now. And then if you're alone with your improvement suggestion, it's quite easy to give up, and especially when you're not affected, if you're not the person with a disability. And so many give up. And it's not because there is a person that dislikes people with disability, who wants to make something bad for them. It's just that other things are more important all the time. And so this just happens. So what is the result? I have a picture from former time, which is changing because people are much more aware of this. But for a long time, men were designing kitchens, for example, and especially in this time, they are usually not working in the kitchen. And they were designing, for example, the worktops at a height that was comfortable for them as a man. But most women, on average, are a little shorter than men are. So it was not ergonomical for most women, and virtually unusable for people of short stature or for wheelchair users. And these people need to think about workarounds. And this might even work in your own home. You have a little step where you can get on and you can reach the worktop much easier. But if you're not at home, if you're confronted with these things all the time in the world outside, this leads to permanent stress, to a permanent mental load. You always have to think for workarounds and how to deal with the problems the real world serves you. Here's a picture of a woman standing in front of a door, and there are a few steps leading to the door, and the woman is in a wheelchair and of course cannot go in the town hall, is it here? And this leads to the fear of missing out quite often. And here I have a real world example. And actually, this is not even the fear of missing out, but we'll see about this now. Just imagine you're standing at a train platform with your wheelchair, unable to board because the promised assistant never arrives. And in Germany, you have a right for this assistance, but you have to ask for this days in advance. And even if you do everything right, maybe the assistance does not show up. Then the train departs without you, and yeah, you don't only have the fear of missing out something, but you're actually missing out something because you cannot drive. And at the destination, maybe an important business meeting is waiting, and all you get from the railway company is an apology. This is what happened to Karen Schallert last year. And she made a picture of herself standing in front of the train. You see, the platform is lower than the doors, and she could not get in with her wheelchair there. But fear of missing out is a stressor. For example, if you cannot use a mouse and you need a keyboard and you cannot go over the cookie consent, for example, then already you're out of the web page and you cannot get any information you might need. Here are a lot of examples. Please use the AI of your trust to ask them. They will produce you so many like you want. And I have not the time to go closer in each of everyone, but for every disabilities, there are things you cannot reach. You are missing out when you're are confronted with a web page that is not accessible. A very common stressor in real life is also masking. Autistic masking, especially, it's very often described for autistic people, also referred to as camouflaging, is a learned coping strategy responding to minority stress that may prevent someone being stigmatized and injure their mental health. So people are trying to avoid being stigmatized, but this is costing a lot of energy, it's making a lot of pressure on these people and injures their mental health. Other stressors are downplaying, overcompensating. This is if you have a disability that is everybody can see, you cannot pretend like not having it, but you're trying to downplaying it, you're trying to prove everybody that you're not worse than anybody else. This is not only limited to disabilities, it also affects people marginalized by gender, class, ethnicity, or sexual orientation. And yeah, reason is always the same, the fear of stigmatization. Of course, we all can understand that if you're trying to avoid stigmatization, that is making stress and all this workarounds and being left at the train platform, and stress contributes to almost all lifestyle diseases like depressions, burnout, bore out, if nobody is giving you work, high blood pressure, heart attacks, obesity, leading to diabetes, allergies, and much more. But is it true that people with disabilities are a burden? blind Steve Weidel, a friend of mine, also formats Word documents faster than his sighted colleagues because he just knows the keyboard shortcuts. And he's done with this normally much faster than the people using a mouse. Or who types faster? A sighted person using 2 fingers and searching for every key, or someone who types without looking at the keys? Karen Schalland, the woman at the train platform, says, I'm not working worse, I work different. I'm quite sure that people with disabilities are not a burden. Let the following sink in. As careers progress, so does experience. As life progresses, the likelihood of disability increases. In many organizations, disabled employees are likely to be the most experienced. My answer is to build up a welcoming culture where everybody feels welcome, feels at home, and it is a part of resilience. Why is it so? 97% of disabilities are acquired later in life. Just think about it. Nearly nobody is born with a disability. I had a roommate at my work in my office, and he was one of 2 people that was able to work with a prehistoric database. The other colleague retired, and my roommate became blind. No one was able to work with that database anymore. So please, keep this in mind. There is no such thing like we don't have to make something accessible because I know the person working with this product and he doesn't have any disability. This happens when life progresses. In Germany, at the age of 65 or older, 25%, every 4th of people have severe disabilities. And everybody else also sees, hears, walks, and worse than before. So when I say this could be you, I actually mean this will be all of us. Yes, me, of course, too. This is something that just happens to us when we're becoming older. So how to create a welcoming culture? What can we do? Actually, we, the people, including me with 25 years of experience, who have shaped the world as it is, cannot do so much anymore. Or is there anyone here in this room who consciously excludes marginalized people? I hope not. So what needs to change? Let us have a look at the recruitment process. It's quite clear that job postings must be perceivable by all candidates. They must offer multiple methods of contact. Long story short, the entire recruitment process must be accessible so that people who can hear has a possibility to apply, and people that but cannot see, and also deaf people can apply. If it comes to an interview, the inviting organization should be prepared for candidates with disabilities. For example, there should be a language interpreter available, and the organization should ask the candidates what they need to feel comfortable, not only because of accessibility reasons, but just to make the candidates more comfortable. But mindset is not enough. If a selection panel with the best intentions and mindset consists only of non-disabled white men sitting across the table, it will still feel like them versus me. Mindset alone does not change power dynamics. Representation changes how products affect people and how they are made. A round table creates a different experience than a dividing one. This is a change in emotion. Imagine sitting in a meeting room once again. This time you're sitting at the round table in a team that includes disabled colleagues. Would you still feel uncomfortable suggesting accessibility improvements? I don't think so. And I hope you can feel the change. So what can we do? Embrace the we. Don't exclude marginalized people from your teams, like immigrants, LGBTQ plus people, and of course, people with various disabilities. Only diverse teams are able to make relevant decisions for a diverse society. This is something after 25 years in the business, I think is the only way to make products that serve everybody. Okay, that's it. Thank you. And yeah, if you liked it, try to connect. I'm on LinkedIn, and yeah, that's it. I hope you liked it. And if you have time, please ask me your questions.
Thank you, Marc. That was great. Yeah, I think we have time for one or two questions before our next session. But yeah, I really appreciated that. We've been talking in the chat about just you never know what someone's disabilities or marginalizations are, and it's also it's very easy to look at something and go, oh, this works for me. It's going to work for everybody. I'm very average. I'm very average. So of course this will, no, not the case. Yeah, does anyone have any questions for Marc that you want to put in the chat? If not, I will, you can put your slide up again to just show people where and how to connect. And then we can take a quick break.
Okay.
Jesse says that was great. I'm a disabled vet and web dev, and that was a really good overview. Thank you, Jesse.
Yeah, it was very fast one. I normally need for this talk 45 minutes, but I think the main points were in there, and I hope you can take away something from this.
We have actually a question from Amber in the Q&A section. Can you speak to how things have been going in the past year following the EAA change or the EAA deadline? Have you seen meaningful change?
Yes, I had seen some change because many people were trying to become more accessible before the date when the how do you call it when everybody has to comply. There's this date where from it was the 28th of June 2025, 1 year ago, and after this there was the opposite. The accessibility experts all are complaining that there is so little to do anymore. This is quite frustrating, at least in Germany. I don't know how it is in other countries. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that the institution who should look that everybody is doing what they have to do did not start working for quite some time. And so I think many organizations and companies are hoping that there will be no consequences if they don't do anything. And we are in this phase where we all hope that the work is now starting, and there are also already, I know, some letters going to companies and asking the companies to become more accessible, and so I hope this is changing soon. But first impression was very frustrating.
Yeah, we're in a similar situation, sort of, in the United States. Public universities have been under a deadline from the federal government to become WCAG 2.2 compliant under one of our laws for accessibility. And the deadline for that was this past April, I believe. And then they got an extension and pushed it back because people were having trouble getting things together to make that deadline. But I believe that there's now a lawsuit against the federal government by a group for the blind, saying people have had plenty of time and plenty of notice. Pushing back this deadline is discriminatory against people who need these accessibility features.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. Cool. Oh, Amber says, I noticed last year that our web traffic from Germany was way, way up, but in 2026, it's been down a lot. It makes sense that what you're saying, that they stopped caring as much following the deadline.
Yeah, companies quite often, when they are thinking about accessibility, quite often they are thinking about costs, but there are so many great talks and numbers that are saying if you include everybody, you have probably more customers. And not only this, accessible website is good for everybody. And there's not a single person in the world who can click on a small button faster than on a big button. It's not even necessary that you have an accessibility and a disability to benefit from accessibility. There is just no downside from accessibility, especially if you're working in the business for me like 20 years, you know that this is not an effort, at least not technical. A content creator should think about text alternatives for images. But if you have a solution for a problem and you make it reusable, there's not 1% more work using a accessible slider for your homepage and putting on this the corporate design of your customer than using an inaccessible. If you have done this once and you can reuse it, it's not work at all anymore from a technical point of view.
Exactly.
And this is why I'm so, when you're using WordPress, for example, if you're going with the 20 themes, 27, 26, 25, there's accessibility built in. If you don't break it, you're already on a good way. And this means also even for small organizations, for schools, for kindergarten, for everybody, this is affordable because it's already built in. This is important. No MVP without accessibility, because it's very expensive to put it in afterwards. If you have to repair it, it's very hard and very expensive. But use the tools that are out there. There's no reason for not doing it. Just ask somebody who knows what to do and how, but the solutions are here already. You just have to use them.
Thank you so much. I actually also, that reminds me to take a moment to plug our September summit, which will be on how to champion accessibility and show people how it's possible, it's necessary, and it's approachable. It does not have to be hard. We will put the links for that in the chat. Yes, thank you, Reed. And now it's time for our next presenter. Everyone give a round of applause for Marc. And it's time to welcome Joe. Let me get my slides shared because I'm going to use them this time, I swear. All right. Yes. So our next session, when good accessibility intentions break WordPress websites, will be given by Joe Leprest. Joe is a WordPress accessibility specialist with more than a decade of hands-on WordPress experience. He and his wife own ClearPath Web Accessibility, which is an accessibility company focused on WordPress, manual audits, remediation, and team training. Joe works directly with WordPress teams to fix real accessibility issues without relying on overlays or quick fix automation. Take it away, Joe.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If you don't mind, I'm just going to share here real quick. Quick little PowerPoint I put together. I would like to take a minute and say thank you to Marc. That was a really good talk, because I do believe that we get lost sometimes, and accessibility becomes more of a checklist and a deadline for us. And the fact is, the end result is we want to help people, help everybody. And as he mentioned, eventually we will be helping ourselves because we all will be there at some point. And I appreciate WordPress Campus for putting this on, putting shining a little light on that, and to everybody who's tuned in because you obviously care about this. So this is going to be about, we all have good intentions. Most people here have heard about accessibility and know that it's an important thing. So it's something that we all understand that we kind of need to do. And this is actually a live example of something that I've been through, where a WordPress owner, needed to fix accessibility. So what they did was they downloaded a plugin. The intent is good. They understand that there was an issue. They understand that there was an opportunity to help people. I'm sure they started understanding about lawsuits and things like that. So the intent was good. So, but the reality was that when the plugin was installed, things like the scores improved and the end user could do things like change the color contrast or font size and things like that. But the reality of it was that it didn't fix some of the most important things that actually stops users from using a website. So, I appreciate the effort. They tried to do the right thing, but there was still that giant gap. And with that said, I understand why, and I'm sure everybody here could understand why. This is, in my opinion, one of the main reasons why WordPress is what WordPress is, because it makes it easier for the average user like myself to be able to do amazing things. You want to work on your SEO for your website. There's a plugin for that. You need security. There's a plugin for that. I don't have to be a coder. I don't have to do all of that. You want to add a contact form or some other type of form. There's plugins for that. So it's a natural progression that when you think of accessibility, you think, okay, well, let's install and plug in. This is kind of our universe here. It's what makes us great. But if we let it get a little carried away, it could also become a hindrance. So what happened was basically the plugin worked. It did help the experience a little bit, and according as far as the client was concerned, it was doing its job. The overlay or widget popped up, it functioned. He could press a button in contrast or text spacing or stuff like that would actually work pretty well for him. And most importantly, the little don't get me started. The little number they give you, the 1 through 100 on your site being this is the percent it's accessible. We get caught up in that number, but that's unfortunately what some people focus on. So that looked good to him. But what we found when it came to actually going in and manually testing it was that the keyboard navigation was still broken. And that's one of the most important things. The forms were still missing proper labels. In some cases, the software added extra labels to it that really made it not understandable. The screen reader announcement was still off because some things weren't fixed and some things were doubled up. The layout was still would still be broken when the individual actually zoomed into the site instead of using the little magnifying tool or using the overlay. So when the overlay did zoom in and made the site bigger, the site still broke. Although yes, the user could zoom in. So that it's just really important to really understand what accessibility is and understand that these overlays, I don't want to knock them because they do help in some cases, but they are not the answer by themselves. I skipped one here. So it's really important to understand that accessibility lives in the user experience. it's not a problem that a plugin can fix all by itself. It needs manual intervention. And I believe Marc, as he expressed it, that manual intervention should really be at the beginning stages when it comes to the designing, InDesign, Figma, all of that, designing it, and then translating that accessibility to the developer. So when they build your design, they're building it with accessibility in mind from the beginning. It's so much better. And then eventually you're able to just bake that process into your design and development stage moving forward, so it doesn't really add to your time spent, your scope. But it's really important to understand that really accessibility is about navigating them. It's about so much more. So we got a quick talk here, but it's about navigating the menu. Can users reach all of the links? Can they use the controls using only a keyboard? And can they do it from their desktop? And I see keyboard, but also can they do it in mobile? That's very important, especially nowadays. Can the individual complete the form? And if they make a mistake, is there clear messages telling them where the mistake was made and how to fix it? Can the user finish the checkout? Ton of e-commerce sites, all of that stuff. So that's obviously very important. And then can a user recover from the errors? That has to do with with completing the form as well. But that's kind of an unforgotten area of that. A lot of times it's, yeah, we can complete the form. Yeah, it's nice and everything. But when something goes wrong, what happens? That's very important. And if any of those experiences are broken, the fix has to happen inside the website. I've not seen yet a plugin that can just instantly fix all of those correctly. So ask yourself this before adding another plugin, because we all know, at least I know from experience, that adding plugins are amazing, but eventually it's going to start slowing your site down. Plugins are going to mess with each other and break things. So you want as the minimum amount of plugins to still get the effect that you want. So before you go adding another plugin, just ask yourself these few things and try them. Do them yourself. It'll take you 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Use your keyboard to tab through the entire site. Start from the top, go to the bottom. Use the tab button to navigate it. If you have to go back, you hold shift while hitting the tab button. That's how you go forward and backwards. Hit enter or space to activate things. Open drop-down menus, click links, expand all that when a new modal happens. How does it announce? Does your attention get brought to it? All of these little things, but it'd be done within a minute. You can just tab through. And as you're tabbing through, watch for your focus indicator. Look, because you should have a visual focus indicator that tells you what interactive element you're on. And it should be color, should have a proper contrast ratio, just throwing that out there. But regardless, you want to have a focus indicator. Make sure you know where you are. You can close your eyes, hit the focus a couple of times, open your eyes, and you should be able to tell right where your focus is. Check your image alt text, not just for missing alt text, but for proper alt text. A lot of people think you just got to have something. And in most cases, something isn't always better than nothing. Have a descriptive alt text of it and only have it 1 to 2 sentences. Don't have this enormous description. And this is a hard part where software doesn't do this very well. So this is a very important thing. And unfortunately, as we know from WordPress, that you can't just go into your media file and add the alt text. You can, but that doesn't fix the problem on the front end of your website. So as you're adding images, the best practice is just make sure everything has an alternative text, descriptive text, and everything you need from the beginning. So then when you use that on all of the pages, it comes with that. I'm sure we all know that it's very difficult to go catch them on the front end. Test a form end to end. Are all the fields labeled, and not just with text, the place text, not just with that, because that goes away the moment anything gets added to that. And like I talked about earlier, do errors explain the fix? Use your screen reader, turn your screen reader on while you're doing all of this. That's super helpful because it's very important to not just make sure visually you can see what's going on, but the screen reader is announcing to you what is happening, where you are, and what has happened. So that's very important. And for the love of all things holy, complete the most user flow. Identify the one thing your website or your client's website was meant to do: e-commerce, information, contact us, a landing page, and complete that user flow without a mouse. Use only a keyboard and make sure you can do the most important thing on there. That is very important, and that is going to help you a lot and really opening up to what you understand needs to be fixed. That's obviously not going to give you all of the issues, but clearly the main user flow is the most important thing. And the reason why I and my wife are so passionate about the WordPress community, not only this is where we got started 10 years ago, I mean, that aside, WordPress, the CMS, is just one of the most powerful ones out there and most used. So I'm just going to skip to the tagline. When WordPress gets accessibility right, the web gets better for everyone. And the math is the math. I don't even need to advocate that to anybody here. I just want to reiterate that because we are the ones that have the ability to do something. One thing, I talk to a lot of companies and a lot of individuals that yearn for that knowledge and they want to be better and get better and help people. The truth of the matter is they're dealing with one platform, with one website, which is really important. Don't get me wrong, but when I address the WordPress community, I feel different about it. And as the WordPress community, you should feel different about it too. I mean, it's the cliche, man. When what comes with great power comes great responsibility, and that's us. And I'm right there with us. So and as Mark mentioned previously, 1 in 6 people in the worldwide experience some sort of significant disability at some point in their life. Getting older, it's going to happen. It's going to happen to everybody. You're going to break a leg, you're going to break an arm, something's going to happen. 1 in 4 U.S. adults report having a disability. These are big numbers. These are big numbers, and these are numbers. These are all individuals that we can help with. I want to say our platform. It's a community platform, but with WordPress, by using WordPress, because it's such a large part of the world's internet, which is huge. So again, I just feel very strongly about what we're able to do. So this is why I appreciate things like the WordPress campus and do things like this. So just to touch on the talk, basically WordPress, our accessibility isn't something you can install. It's just not. It's something that takes manual labor. We can use plugins, and there's roles for plugins. I mean, I have a plugin on the WordPress repository for accessibility, but the plugins are not the answer. They're not the end all be all. A plugin is like every other tool. It's meant to be a tool in your toolbox, but you're the one wielding the tool. You're the one doing the work. But we, can't build the house without our tools. So there's that love-hate relationship, and we just got to remind ourselves of that line sometimes. So tools help in the ways that they can definitely help you identify some of the problems. They can help direct your attention to issues for you to review. They can help you, test issues. But the end result is you have to test everything yourself And as a general practice, I always test everything the software flags as well, because you're the user. You have to test to make sure that that is an actual issue. And then implementation. Implementation fixes, creates access. And it just doesn't get any simpler than that. The more we fix, the better our sites are, the more access the end user has. And that's what this is about. So, and the real fixes happen in the code. You can't just slap an overlay on it. And in my opinion, there's no such thing as a plugin you could put in that's going to scan your site, all of your site, and then implement all of these fixes. It just doesn't work. So always start with the real experience, fix the actual barriers, and that's how accessibility truly improves and evolves to everybody who needs it, including us. With that said, this is our plugin on the repository. It's free, but please, it's a tool. It is not going to fix it. It gives you a lot of options. It helps you, it's got a little scanner. It helps you find the missing alt text and add the missing alt text to the media file and the pages and posts, which is a big time saver. Contrast ratio checker, interactive checklist, little training course. So yeah, that's pretty much about it. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and talk about this subject that I'm very passionate about. And I hope I was able to convey that. And I hope I was able to give you some actionable steps to go home and test your site. Use your keyboard, tab navigation, use it. Focus state, links, get rid of the click here's, the learn mores, add helpful descriptions to your alt text. Use your tables and headers properly. And just make sure it works, because it's going to be important to us as well one day. So with that, I would love to take any questions. If you need me, you're able to. I love answering questions, because again, this is what we do. We want to help. So if you ever have any questions, you need to bounce some ideas off, or if you get stuck in a problem and you need help with a think tank real quick to just kind of problem solve, please reach out, because the end game is to help. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. This was really, really great. We've had a bunch of people saying as much in the chat. I think having that list of just ways to, you broke it down, you made it really, really approachable. And I think, yeah, it is very easy to go, well, the plugin developer is an expert, so if they install the plugin, it'll be fine. And people don't know how to do that testing. So yeah, if you guys have any questions for Joe, please put them in the chat. Joe, I was going to ask you, I'm blanking now. This is not good. I should have written it down. I was going to ask you if you had any tips for things that people try to do that make things worse, or not tips. If you have any examples of things that people try to do that make things worse rather than just not helping. And I understand if the answer is no, or I can't tell you about that because my clients would not like it.
Yeah, the story I used was a real situation where a client really did. I get a lot of clients that have these overlays, and when I approach them, I tell them, your site is different with that overlay on, and unless you want me to audit both of them, it's not feasible. So just turn this overlay off before I run my testing. And the reason why this is because it hides things, but it breaks a lot of things as well. They will add, if your HTML isn't correct, if your ARIA labels aren't correct, it'll try to add on top of it. And sometimes it'll think that your ARIA label isn't correct or your HTML isn't correct, but we all know there's a ton of ways to do things, and we might have been able to get it to work, but the software doesn't detect it, so it just adds an extra layer on top of that, and it pretty much breaks that function to where it did actually barely work before. So I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it does. I actually just looking in the chat, I'm seeing a lot of people going, nope, oh, we don't. In this community, we are allowed to knock overlays, I think is, you are allowed to knock overlays is what Ed said. And Mark mentioning that he agrees tools are a real time saver, but having human testing to identify false positives and things like that is super important. Amber, I think earlier also mentioned knowing the difference between a testing plugin and an overlay plugin, that they do different things, but it can be, hard for people who are totally new to it to tell them apart, because they just look accessible.
Agreed. And even with the testing plugins, some people don't understand that you have to go beyond what that software is capable of doing. They think, okay, it found all the issues. Axe or Wave pointed out all these problems. We fix it. We're running clear in Axe or Lighthouse. We're good. That's not really how it works.
Yeah. Jesse says, I'm curious about testing tools. I spent a lot of time in Site Improve and used some browser stuff. Is there a good list to mix with live use?
I use a mix of tools when I'm on the front end of the site. Axe is definitely good, and Lighthouse and Wave have their roles. I've been using since DHS Trusted Tester. I use Andy. I think that's pretty useful. But again, in my opinion, they're all useful in their specific roles. I haven't found one that I can fully trust or say that tool by itself is good to go. So, and it also is important about how it matches your workflow. For instance, I use some tools as a color contrast checker or a picker tool, or just to check for headings or things like that. But that's about as useful as they are for me. So it also depends on your user flow.
Perfect. Mark also says, I can really recommend the tools from Paul J. Adam for manual testing. So that is very good. And if people want to be sharing links in the chat, we're just about at time to move to our next presenter, but I would really love it if people are just sharing the links for tools that they use so that everybody can enjoy and benefit. And I will be collecting them to put into the show notes. I don't know, to put into the video descriptions later.
If you don't mind,
yeah,
I would just like to point out, people are looking for tools, and that's great. I would just implore that your best tool is your screen reader and your keyboard.
Can you actually, in that case, recommend a screen reader that you just think does the job really well?
I use NVIDIA or NVDA as my personal favorite, but I'll also use, VoiceOver and those other things. But NVDA is my personal go-to, but I also work from a Windows. Yeah,
I also work for Windows, and a lot of the recommendations I've seen for Mac are for Mac, so that's why I asked. Amber says, NVDA is only on Windows. If you work on Mac, you need to use VoiceOver. Mark has mentioned Axe and Arc Toolkit. I'm going to let that keep going in the chat because it's Andrea's time now. Let me just get up. Again, I made these slides. I'm going to use them, and I'll introduce you. So our next presenter, of course, I immediately lost all my tabs. Our next presenter is Andrea Roenning. Andrea has more than 20 years of experience building stuff on the web. She works on WordPress themes and plugins at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where her team manages a giant multi-site. Andrea also contributes to WordPress core and documentation teams. So she's got, I was going to say way more background than me. I don't want to put myself down, but I want to see what Andrea's got to say. All you.
Hi, everyone. Let's see, I will share my screen once I find the button again. Okay, and cool. I think that is working. Gotta love Zoom. It always moves everything around. All right, but I think I'm good. I think the screen is being shared. And yeah, this is lessons learned from adding a new primary admin user role in our multi-site. There we go. All right. And yeah, I'm Andrea Roenning. I'm a developer for the Whisk Web hosting service at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And yeah, I also contribute to WordPress core and the documentation team. And when I'm not at a computer, I like to cross-country ski and ride bikes. So yeah, Madison has the largest university in Wisconsin with about 50,000 students enrolled. And we are a decentralized university. I know some of you may be on either side of that coin of centralization, but here there are 23 different schools and colleges and many different administrative units. And we have a great marketing team and they provide brand requirements, but there is still a lot of room for variation within that brand. And some sites, like the School of Business, choose to design and host their own websites, and that's cool. However, the WisQueb team that I work for hosts about 1,500 campus websites that are all on the branded UW theme. And this number was closer to 2,000 sites at one time, but we were able to archive some sites that were no longer in use. And we run a multi-site in AWS with very limited plugin options. Our hosting service has been hosting sites on WordPress for about 9 years. And our team is pretty small, with a handful of members covering development, support, communications, and some team members have split roles with other campus services. So, who uses WisQueb? We host some large campus sites like housing or the School of Nursing, and a lot of small sites like research sites or project sites that, maybe are just temporarily around for an event or something. But we don't host student portfolio sites. One requirement to use our hosting service is that an active staff or faculty member is a site owner. So this leads us to the primary contact challenge. And this was, how do you track who is in charge of each site across so many websites across campus, particularly when sites have been around for years and faculty and staff come and go at the university? How do we know who we should email if there is an issue on a site, or if we want to ask if the site is no longer in use and we need to archive it? So here's how our GitLab issue was framed in October 2022, which was a few months after I started working here. So we have difficulty knowing who we should contact with important decisions related to a site. We can often look up who requested the site originally, but that doesn't mean they're the primary contact, administrator, or even still working on the site. So first, we identified that there was no way to tell when an administrator had last logged into our multi-site. So we started tracking this data in the network-wide users meta table. And here's a little code snippet of this function, or of a similar function that we use to track when a user has last logged in, and save that to the database. So next, I had the brilliant idea. Let's just add a new user role. We'll call them a primary administrator, and we'll assign the same capabilities as the administrator role. And this is easy peasy to do in WordPress with just a little bit of code. And then we'll ask our existing customers to identify someone as their primary admin for each site. And for new sites, we can change our new site script to automatically assign the person who requested the site to the primary admin going forward. And WordPress has so many nice things built in for user roles that you just get for free. I highlighted a few here on this slide. So first, you can see in the role, there's a column with admin on the admin users table. And secondly, you can filter this table by clicking on the primary administrator link on the top. Third, a site administrator can use the bulk actions menu to change a user's role to a primary administrator within the UI. So my reasoning was that the proper way to give access to a WordPress user role was by testing for capabilities and not by testing for a specific user role. And here on the screen is a little bit of PHP to see if the current user can manage options. And if they can, we can usually assume that they have administrator privileges. And by setting the capabilities of the primary admin equal to the administrator's capabilities, I figured they should have all the rights and access that they need. And I assumed that the few well-known plugins that WisQueb uses were testing for WordPress core capabilities. So yeah, we went for it. We pushed the code to our production multi-site. My team wrote a blog post and a knowledge base article, and then we held a lunch and learn to explain all of these changes to our site owners. And for a bit, things were good. But then, after a few days, the team received a report that a primary admin could not use the Gravity Forms plugin. And so after a quick search, I found this forum response that mentioned that Gravity Forms is only available to administrators, but there are custom capabilities that you can add to other roles. And they suggested a plugin to help manage roles and capabilities. And there are third-party plugins for managing user roles and capabilities. And at my previous job, I had used Publish Press, and I was really happy with it on a single site. But my team is very hesitant to take on any new third-party plugins because of the support burden. So whenever possible, we have found it best to own the code running on our multi-site. So as a fix, I added an action on the admin init hook to add in the Gravity Forms capability for primary admins. And this was pretty easy, although I didn't love having the code run on every single page load of the admin. I was a bit worried about slowing things down for our editors, but it was a good way to make sure that all of our primary admins were covered. And our customers love Gravity Forms, so we needed to keep supporting it. I'm just going to pause here for 1 second and pull up the chat window. Okay, cool. I do hear thunder in the distance, so hopefully, hopefully I'll be able to keep power throughout this. Okay, so a few months later, a user reported that they also could not use the Yoast duplicate post plugin. This is another popular plugin that makes it really easy to clone a post or start a new draft from an existing post. So to test this, I created a new primary admin and activated that plugin and noticed that there was a box unchecked under the plugin's settings, duplicate post permissions tab in the UI, and that was unexpected. So we had a workaround here that we could explain to our users, but it would be better if we would just make this change for them using a bit of code. And we already were adding the Gravity Forms capability. So we could just add this Yoast duplicate post capability to that function that was running on every admin in it. And the problem was solved, right? But then we heard that our primary admins also could not use the events calendar. And after looking at how many different user capabilities were needed for the events calendar, we decided to go in a different direction. So, how did we fix this? Our new plan was to ditch the custom primary admin user role altogether and just use the standard administrator role. And then we could start tracking the primary contact attribute as metadata. And this change required many steps. We needed to add a new primary contact user meta checkbox and store that data. And then we needed to add a new column in the site admin user table to show that. And we needed to update our new site script so that the person who requested the site was added as a regular administrator and then given the primary contact metadata. And then we needed to update our admin dashboard widget that we had built to use the new logic. And then we needed to change all of the existing users that we had so diligently gotten to adopt the primary admin user role back to the standard administrator user role with the user meta of primary contact. So here's what the primary contact checkbox looks like in the user profile UI. So when you're in the admin and you click on your username on the top right, and you can edit things about yourself, this box is at the bottom of that form. And here's the snippet for where we're saving this to the database. We're using the update user option here in a way that it is specific to a site, which is also still called a blog in the WordPress multi-site. Some of these things, oh gosh, my brain still hurts in thinking about how this is in the database and right, the site blog. A lot of this is just like legacy from WordPress has been around for a long time. I'll share a little bit of what some of this database looks like. This is just from my local testing. So this is, I use WP Local and yeah, just a little database view. So each site keeps the user roles under its own options table. You can kind of see here for a site that's number 73, it's got an options table here. But the primary contact information is stored in the main multi-site's user meta table. And you can see that here in this select statement. And we prefix the meta key with the site ID here. So this site is number 71, and it's associated with these two user IDs, the number 1 and 289, and those are both primary contacts on the site. So each person may be administrator for multiple sites, but they might not actually be the primary contact for all of those sites. Different folks at the university wear different hats. So we needed to track this on a per site basis. And here's the example of our database widget, where a site owner could see that there's no primary contact yet identified for their site, and they can now add themselves as a primary contact or reach out to support for help adding someone else. And here's what the user list looks like with the primary contact column that we needed to add. And I'll just note that one thing that we lost is the ability to edit this from the bulk actions UI. This means that administrators can only set themselves as a primary contact. If they wanted to give this designation to somebody else on their staff, they would need to reach out to support. Because super admins are able to update the user meta for anybody. And there are a handful of us who are super admins on the multi-site who can help out. And then another developer on our team, Scott, wrote a script and a UI to change the users with the primary admin user role back to regular user administrators and update the primary contact meta key by looping over this list of users in the database. And this was really nice to be able to do this in batches, so we didn't have to worry about maxing out our server memory in the process. And if we did run into a database issue during that changeover, we could see where it happened. Okay, so once we figured all that out, we shifted again. We pushed the code changes to production. We looped through all the users. We updated the knowledge base article, and we held another lunch and learn to explain the change. So yeah, we learned a lot as a team through this process. And as a developer, it was really nice to be trusted to make this change on, a pretty newish team that had just hired me that year. And then I had the responsibility to clean up the consequences that happened afterwards. But I felt like I had the full support of my team. And so, yeah, the primary admin, primary contact changes happened back in 2023. And we can see that for some of our sites that don't have primary contacts identified, that, perhaps they have not been logged into for a while either. And this could be because an administrator was a faculty member who had retired or a student who graduated. But we can see that we had some good adoption of sites who identified a primary contact. It's like roughly 60% on our kind of old classic multi-site. But last year we spun up a new multi-site because we have a new block theme that, we're teaching people to use the block editor to edit pages. And we are in the middle of migrating all of those old sites from our old multi-site to this new server. And we're still using that user meta driven primary contact paradigm there too. So we have about 600 individual sites on this multi-site so far. And because the primary contact is identified on site creation now, we have a pretty good list to start with. And we occasionally run into the issue where an administrator cannot assign somebody else as a primary contact, but this has not been a huge support burden. So finally, I'll leave you with a quote from our service coordinator, Jenna Klinner. She said that the primary contact role has been extremely useful in migration to the new theme. And with so many sites to move over, it really helps to know who to contact when we have questions. Some of our sites have more than 20 admins, and we really don't want to blast all those users with an email about the status of the site. So yeah, thanks for coming to this talk. Thanks for coming today. And I'll leave you with a couple of links to learn more about WhiskWeb or UW Theme 2.0. And I think we still have some time for questions.
We definitely do. Thank you, Andrea. One, I feel completely confident saying that you definitely do know more about how WordPress works than I do. But two, that felt very real. I'll make a change and it'll And then the cascade, as Reed said in the chat, the cascade. Yeah, anyone who has any questions for Andrea, please put them in the chat. Stephanie has mentioned custom post statuses are another thing that are supported in theory, but in practice, especially on multi-site, it's a train wreck, and you usually have to use metadata instead. I think.
Yeah, publish press. I feel like we had like a draft status or something like that we still wanted public on my old job. And right, we ran into some revision history weirdness but the Publish Press plugin had some ways to help with custom statuses. Oh, and the other thing that happened was they would come up in search. And so that was not great either. And that's where, right, the cascade is real, especially if you're using third-party plugins. Because if you're using like a search plugin, that might layer on top of, oh gosh, yes, so many things can happen.
Yeah, exactly. And that also goes back to the thing of like, well, the thing we were talking about during Joe's presentation of, sort of trusting a plugin developer to do things in a way that you would consider to be sensible or to be the goal. And that's not always the case. Cameron mentioned that a lot of plugin developers don't know about multi-site and don't test for it. I don't know. We have a question from Ed who says, what other data sets should we be looking at other than last login?
Yeah, one other thing we started raising to the surface for our multi-site users is the page last updated. That's there in the database, but we added it to the column so that users can see it right off the bat and sort by it. So the published date is nice, but knowing when a user has logged in, knowing when a page has last been updated, just surfacing those two data points has been really helpful.
Yeah, I think you mentioned at the start that there were originally 2,000 or so websites and that you ended up decommissioning about 500 of them. Was that, maybe I missed it, was that before, during, after figuring out the last login, figuring out the primary admin, figuring out the last updated?
Kind of throughout, right? There have been, changes over time with the service. But I think being able to identify sites that weren't in use, having the last login information was helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a thing that I think it's useful to have it visible, and it's frustrating to find sometimes. Cameron says, I'm dealing with an issue now where a user role editor created custom role doesn't handle capabilities properly for a page builder plugin. So they have to revert the role back to core editor.
Yeah, sounds similar.
Mhm. Ed also says we've been looking at updating the Open Lab suite of plugins. So that's a suite that you can put onto a multi-site to add a bunch of specific functionality,
Nice.
with some admin screens to help do exactly this type of work, identifying inactive sites that don't get much traffic, and users who may not be actively updating. I can think of, well, first, do you maybe have any recommendations for Ed about identifying inactive sites? Although we've sort of talked about that, but.
Yeah, right. I other than the ones that we've touched on, it is a challenge. I can just say that. But yeah, my team tries to be in contact with the folks who are active editors. But
Yeah.
it is hard to know when it is time to archive a site.
Yeah. And I think that people have said this in the chat, but I also want to say, and you had it in your slides, but the ability to identify one primary point of contact on a multi-site is so useful. I've been part of or consulted on some multi-site cleanups that, like, just figuring out who to reach out to would have been a huge headache. Was in some cases a huge headache. Kathy says, thank you, Andrea, for sharing. Have you tried the User Role Editor Pro? I'd like to have a role where our support team can access and edit all subsites, but not be a super admin.
I have not, but yeah, it would be worth checking out to see if it, yeah, if it does meet
That,
your need. Yeah.
yeah. And that is a use case that I had not fully like imagined, but it seems so, now that you've said it, Kathy, it seems so like obvious of, oh yeah, to have maybe help desk people,
Right.
student workers be able to go in and support sites without being able to make network changes.
Right. We keep a list for our help desk of sites that we host because there are many sites that are not hosted by us. So
Mhm.
step one is for the help desk to just know, is it a WISC website or not? So they can do a command control F to search for that site. But yeah, other than that, most of our help desk agents do not have super admin access. So
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah, there was another question about running into misuse by users with the administrator role. We still keep like WPKSES active. So all of the HTML is filtered through, folks can't necessarily add iframes to their sites. They're still kind of limited in certain ways, but for the most part, right. Our administrators all have to log in through NetID or Shibboleth through an Active Directory type system. So that helps keep things locked down pretty well.
Mhm. I think I'm looking for other questions in the chat. Let's see. Cameron, no, Jesse says, multi-site management is so fun. Thank you for the entertaining and great info. Event calendar is a former foe, I
Yeah.
think.
We actually ended up replacing it with a homegrown tool.
Really? Is that in any of the documentation links that you shared in your slides?
No, no. But it was something where we tried to do an update on our multi-site and it kept failing, so we needed to pivot.
Yeah. Yeah. Calendar is tricky. I think maybe was it Ed who I've talked to have said like it's hopefully someday WordPress will build calendar into core and it'll just work.
But date time math is some of the hardest stuff. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Taylor says we banished the event calendar to a standalone site that we're very careful with.
I love that.
Yep. Exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much, Andrea.
Thank you, everyone.
This was great and very, very real. It's been really good to have you. All right. We are going to wrap up. And I just have a few quick things to say as we do. I got too focused on Andrea's talk and then I've lost all my tabs and there we go. But first, I want to say thank you, of course, to our volunteer presenters for sharing their time, their expertise. Every single one of these talks has been fantastic. Thank you to everyone who attended. Having you guys in the chat, engaging has been just really good energy today. Today's webinar was recorded and it will be posted on our website and via YouTube. We are not going to be downloading and sharing the chat. So if you want to pull a copy, I guess now would be the time. If you'd like to stick around, we are also going to be hosting a WPCampus after hours session from 12:30 to 1 p.m. So starting in about 10 minutes, if you're in a different time zone. This is just a social session. It's not going to be recorded and it'll just be a good time to hang out, talk through all of the ideas that came up today, ask any other questions that you have, catch up, just bond. We'll be moving to a regular Zoom meeting for this part because webinars don't really support that very well. And the Zoom invite is in the chat. Reed, if you could share that now, that would be great. But before we completely head over and we wrap up the webinar portion of our day, I do have a few more things that I want to say. First, just share. I want to highlight the events committee who made the summit possible. As I said earlier, WPCampus is a nonprofit 100% volunteer organization, and we are able to provide events like this one today because of the dedication of individuals who donate their time and their energy and their skills. As the director of events, I'm really honored to get to work with these awesome people. And if you are interested in volunteering to be part of the events committee or to be part of any other projects, but of course I am biased, or if you have ideas for events that we should do in the future, please reach out and let us know. We would love to have you on the team. And if you don't have capacity for that, although it's not, we make it look grand and complicated, but it's actually not, it's chill, it's fun, it's good. But if you just have an idea, let us know. We want to make sure that what we're doing is relevant to you all. I also want to again take this opportunity to highlight, speaking of events, our next summit, Leading on Accessibility in Higher Education, which will be taking place on September 17th. That's another Thursday, September 17th, 10 a.m. Same time. 10 a.m. Eastern, so same time slot. It'll be free for everyone to register. And again, we want to feature talks from our community about how you all are advocating for and leading change around accessibility. So the call for proposals is open now, and you are all invited to submit. The link for registration and the call for proposals link will both be in the chat now. With that, I believe the other Zoom is actually probably going to open a couple of minutes early just so people can trickle on over. I will hang out here, although I am going to try and end the recording. And I am so excited to see you all on the other Zoom. Thank you all for coming. This has been really fun. And I'll let myself say it one more time. It's been really exciting.